Okay? So on the surface, it seems like this war is one between the United States and Iran. But in reality, what this war really is about is a war between the United States and Israel, where the American empire has become corrupt, incompetent, and arrogant. And so now Israel sees an opportunity to replace the American empire in the system. And it's something that eventually every aspect of the system will agree to do. All right? So the main outcome of this war, when it ends, is that Israel will replace America in the Middle East. Okay? All right. So let me first discuss why the American empire is falling. Okay? And the main reason is the idea of something called the military-industrial complex. So, for most of its history, America did not have a professional army. Why? Because the founding fathers and most American citizens believed that if there's a standing army, if there's a professional army, that's a direct threat to the liberty of the Americans, okay? Because the Americans fought a war, the Revolutionary War, to get rid of the professional army that was the British. Okay, so Americans do not like a professional army. But in order to fight World War I and World War II, they didn't have a choice but to create a standing army. The problem is that after America won World War II, the apparatus stayed. And the apparatus wanted to maintain the status quo, meaning they wanted access to unlimited government funds. So this led to the Cold War, and the Cold War was a justification for the MIC, the military-industrial complex, to get as much government funding as possible. And the blue, as you can see, is government expenditures. Okay, we can understand why they spent all this money in World War II, because they were fighting a war to save America and to save the world. But as you can see, even though it dropped drastically at the end of the war, starting with the Cold War, you have this uptick, okay? And then you have the Vietnam War. And then after America won the Cold War, you saw this massive uptick. And this is something called the War on Terror. So the military-industrial complex is always looking to start wars in order to justify its existence. So there's a very famous journalist named Julian Assange, and he said this about America. The point is not to have successful wars. The point is not to win wars. The point is to have never-ending wars, which allows the military-industrial complex to transfer American taxpayer money to a transnational elite. Okay? It's basically, the point of wars is for the military-industrial complex to steal as much money as possible from America. Okay? America spends a lot of money in its military. Okay? America accounts for 41% of all global military spending. Who's next? China. China spends 8.2%. Russia, which is America's main military enemy, only spends 4.1%. Okay? Meaning that Russia spends 1/10 the amount of money that America spends. And you think that, okay, well, all this means is that America is invincible. But what people don't recognize is the level of corruption within the American military. The American military is probably the most corrupt institution in the world, by far. No one even comes close, okay? September 10th, 2001, Donald Rumsfeld, who's the Secretary of Defense for the Americans, he's head of the Pentagon, and this is a day before September 11th, the 9/11 attacks. He said that, he had a press conference and he said that, look, we've looked at the Pentagon books, okay? we're trying to do an accounting of the Pentagon military spending, and we can't find $2 trillion. There's $2 trillion missing from the budget. It went somewhere, we don't know where, but it went somewhere, okay? All right, so this is so where does the money go? It goes to private contractors, okay? These are all private companies that make a lot of money off the government, okay? So listen at the Boeing company. They had in 1 year $20 billion from the government. They got $20 billion in contracts from the government, okay? To do so, they had to spend $16 million in order to lobby Congress through advertisements, through political campaigns. And then they bribed, this is a bribe to politicians. They spent $2 million, okay? So this is a really good business to be in. You spend $2 million, you give them bribes to politicians, then you spend $16 million on campaigns, and then you make $20 billion, okay? This is extremely profitable. The difference, of course, is being picked up by the American taxpayer. The Boeing company is not just a defense contractor, but also makes civilian airplanes. And for these past few years, there's been quite a few cases of civilian airplanes falling out of the sky made by Boeing. Okay, so for example, the Boeing 737 MAX. Okay, there was a recall because there were some engineering issues with the plane. Now, there have been a couple of whistleblowers who've come out and tried to say that Boeing is a very corrupt company, and for a reason, they died. Okay, they just disappeared. We don't know why, but when they were about to testify against Boeing, they somehow died. All right. This is a really interesting story that shows you the level of corruption in the Pentagon. There is this woman who's a contractor for the Army, and she stole $103 million. Okay? That's a lot of money, $103 million. She stole it. The Army didn't know, and she kept on stealing, and no one seemed to care in the Army. But then the IRS, this is the Internal Revenue Service, they recognized that she was getting all this money from somewhere, so they investigated her and recognized, oh my God, she's stealing from the Army. So the IRS told the Army, and that's when the Army recognized, oh, we have a problem, okay? The fact that the Army didn't notice that she was stealing $103 million tells you, actually, theft in the military is probably a very common thing, all right? So ultimately, what this means is that this corruption in the Pentagon is not really sustainable, okay? So let me discuss why this is a problem for America in Iran, okay? So right now America is facing three major issues with this war in Iran. The first major issue is the lack of political will, meaning that this war is very unpopular in America. Only 40% of the population currently support this war, and as things go on and on, support will probably decrease, okay? You need political will because you need Americans to pay for this war. Trump has asked for $200 billion to fund this war, and also it's possible that Trump will call the national draft, which I believe will happen. Okay, so if Americans don't want to support this war, it's very hard to get them to pay for this war and to go fight this war. Second problem is lack of manufacturing capacity. So in other words, what this means is that if you lose planes, if you spend if you use too many bombs, you cannot replenish it because you don't have the factories to produce these planes and bombs quickly enough. Okay? And so if this war drags on too long, then America will just run out of bombs. And the third problem for America is unwillingness to sustain casualties. Okay? And what this means is that the American military is afraid of reporting deaths, casualties, which is weird because in a war, soldiers die. That's just the reality of war. But the Pentagon is afraid of reporting too many deaths because of the fair political backlash. Okay? So these are three major problems for the American military in Iran. These are the three major constraints. All right? So the Americans can't actually resolve these issues, and America will probably lose this war, in which case this gives opportunity for Israel to prove to the world that it should be the empire, okay? And it proves it can be the empire by showing that it does have the political will, it doesn't have the manufacturing capacity, but that's Mossad, okay? And it is much more strategic. The last thing is that it is resilient, meaning that it is willing to accept casualties, okay? So basically, the idea here is the global elite, they need an empire to provide the muscle, but the empire must prove that it can serve the needs of the global elite, okay? And so an empire must prove three things. First of all, it must prove unity. It must prove it has the resources and the capacity, basically the capacity, okay? And it must prove determination. All right? So to understand this idea, let's just do a thought experiment. Right? Let's just say that we're venture capitalists. We have billions of dollars, we have trillions of dollars, and we want to invest in a company. Okay? So we're approached by two companies. Company A, Company B. Okay? So Company A comes to us and says that, look, I have 100 companies, and they're all profitable. Okay? I don't have a business plan, but I have lots and lots of resources, and I have a lot of experience and a lot of skill. And so if I were to invest in another company, I'm sure it'll make a lot of money. Okay? All right. So skills and experience. That is Company A. Company B is these young guys, and they failed, okay? But they're like, you know what? We're gonna put our heart and soul into this enterprise. We're going to work 16 hours a day, every day for as long as it takes. And we won't stop, okay? Even if this company is successful, we're gonna keep on going because it's our passion. And if this company fails, then we're bankrupt. We might kill ourselves, all right? So if you are the venture capitalist, do you put your money in A or do you put your money in B? Now, most people would put their money in A because they think it is low risk. But if you're a smart venture capitalist, you put your money in B because it's high reward. Okay? So Company A already has 100 companies that are successful. People in the company don't really care if this new enterprise is successful or not. Who cares, right? I can afford to lose. In which case, it's more likely the Company A steals your money than actually invests it properly. Whereas Company B is going to be the opposite, where this is their last chance. If they take your money, they're going to make sure that they grow it. Because if they don't grow it, then they themselves die. Okay? So you need these things. You need unity, capacity, and determination. Do you understand? And so what Israel is doing really, it's basically auditioning to the world, we are ready to replace America. We are ready to be the new empire. Okay? All right. So let's look at what's happening. America has this MIC. And so the MIC, military industrial complex, what they're good at doing is producing very expensive weapon systems. But unfortunately, when you actually put these weapon systems into war, it doesn't really do anything, okay? So this is the Patriot missile system that's supposed to protect the GCC in Israel and the American military bases from Iranian drones and missiles. Guess what, guys? Doesn't really work, okay? In fact, as you can see from the video, the Iranians can basically fly drones anywhere in the Middle East, and the Americans can't really stop them. All right, so this is billions of dollars, doesn't really do anything. This is called the F-35. The F-35 is the most advanced fighter jet in the whole world. It has stealth technology, meaning you can't actually lock onto it using radar. This cost $100 million each. Took 26 years to develop. So you would think, wow, it took 26 years, so this must be really, really good. No, it took 26 years because the MIC is really corrupt and they want to steal as much money as possible. Okay? And in this war, the Iranians have already shot down at least one of these jets. Okay? This is not supposed to happen. You're not supposed to be able to shoot these things down. But Iranians have shot it down using very low radar. Again, these things, they're not designed to win wars. They're designed to steal as much money as possible from the American taxpayer. Okay? Now, the last example is the Gerald Ford. This ship cost $13 billion. It cost $13 billion. The annual defense budget for the Iranians is $10 billion. It goes into the war theater, and 3 weeks afterwards, it has to run away, okay? And in fact, the Americans say, oh, the Gerald Ford, this is the most advanced supercarrier in the world. It's probably going to be down for repairs for the next 2 years. And there's argument as to what happened, okay? There are three different possibilities. The first possibility is that there was an accident in the laundry room, and there's a fire, and this fire spread throughout the carrier, okay? Which means that actually the carrier is not very resilient. Okay, so that's one possibility. And that's what the official story is. But there are also others who say like the Iranians hit the ship with a missile. And so the Gerald Ford can't protect itself from Iranian missiles, so it ran away. Okay? The third possibility, the third explanation is the Pentagon recognized that there are severe limitations of the Gerald Ford in actual combat operations. Its radar, its guidance system are all very limited. So the Pentagon withdrew the Gerald Ford because it was absolutely useless in war. Right? Whichever story is true, it doesn't paint a good picture of the American military. $13 billion, and this does nothing. Okay? It's just a white elephant. The Iranians are the, and also this is Iwo Jima, and this came in World War II in the Pacific Theater when the Americans were fighting the Japanese. And this is the height of American military glory, okay? It took about 6,000, the Americans lost 6,000 Marines in taking this island. And that's the sacrifice you need in order to win wars. You're gonna lose a lot of soldiers. And Americans are proud that they were willing to make the sacrifice necessary to win the war. The problem is Americans are no longer willing to sustain casualties, okay? So the Americans sent about 5,000, around 5,000 Marines to Iran, hoping that 5,000 Marines will be enough to win this war, okay? But it just shows you the Americans have no strategy to win this war, and they don't want to make the necessary sacrifices to win this war. They want to win this war as quickly and as cheaply as possible, okay? The Israelis are different, okay? This is Gaza. And we all know that what Gaza did was terrible. But again, if you are auditioning to be an empire, Gaza is proof of concept, okay? Meaning it's showing the global elite, look, we're willing to do what it takes to win this war and defend the empire, okay? So this was a tremendous tragedy, and it's all war crimes, okay? And the entire world is aghast. But if you look at Israeli public opinion, 82% support expelling all Palestinians from Gaza. Okay, 66% believe Amalek exists today. Amalek is just like Israel has this great enemy that it must defeat. Right? So 66% of Israelis believe that this war against Gaza is a war for the very existence of Israel. Okay, this is unity. This is determination. The Americans don't have this. Most Americans oppose what Israel is doing in Gaza. But Israelis themselves support what's going on. Okay, so there's unity. All right. So in 2024, there was the famous Lebanon pager attack. Okay, meaning that the Israelis were able to implant bombs into pagers that went to Hezbollah members, and then it blew up. Okay, and maybe from a military perspective, it didn't accomplish that much. From a psychological perspective, it accomplished a lot. Okay, it scared the living hell out of Hezbollah. It made them paranoid, and also made the world respect Israel more. And Israel spent $275 million to conduct this operation that took decades to implement. Okay. And you're like, okay, why is Israel telling us this? Because again, Israel is auditioning to be the new empire. It's telling the global elite, look, not only will we fight this war for you, not only will we be your muscle, but we'll do it cheaply, man. Not billions of dollars, millions of dollars. This is ISIS. ISIS is Islamic State, okay? And this is considered a terrorist organization. These Sunni extremists who go around and beheading people, all right? Now, this is from the New York Times, and the yellow tells you areas in which they operate. And as you can see, it's really across the Middle East. And the red are incidents of attacks directed by ISIS, okay? Now, something that's really funny about all this is ISIS attacks everywhere in the Middle East except for one country, and that country is Israel. Okay? Really funny how you have these Muslim extremists going around committing all sorts of atrocities everywhere in the Middle East except Israel. And so that's why a lot of people believe that Islamic State is actually a creation of Mossad. But again, Israel is happy for the world to know this because again, Israel is auditioning to be the new empire. And what Israel is saying is, we don't have to use the American strategy of just bombing everyone to death, okay? That's expensive, that's brutal, and it's not very strategic. We can use Mossad to infiltrate groups and use these groups against their comrades, their neighbors. Isn't that much more efficient? Is that much more effective, okay? So what Israel is saying is, we are much better at controlling the Middle East than the Americans. So let us control the Middle East using our strategies, okay?
So you're sitting there going, okay, this person has done their homework. And your guard naturally comes down a bit. That's just how our brains work. If someone establishes credibility early, we give them more rope later. And that's exactly when things start getting sneaky. There's a pivot that happens from the American military is corrupt and wasteful, which is honestly a pretty mainstream position shared by people across the political spectrum. Left and right both agree on this, even if they disagree on everything else. 2, therefore, Israel is strategically positioning itself to replace America as the dominant empire in the Middle East. And that is a massive logical jump that doesn't actually follow from anything that came before it. These are two completely separate claims. One does not prove the other, but because they're stitched together so tightly, and the first one is so well supported, your brain kind of fills in the gap automatically and goes, well, yeah, I guess that tracks. That's a rhetorical technique, not an argument. It's proximity masquerading as causation. The venture capitalist analogy is where I personally started getting uncomfortable. Not because it's necessarily wrong in some abstract theoretical sense, but because of what it's doing to the conversation. It's asking you to think about geopolitics and human suffering like a business pitch, like a startup deck. When Gaza gets framed as a proof of concept for Israel's empire audition, that's not analysis. That's someone being deliberately cold and detached for the sake of sounding like they see the bigger picture that the rest of us are too emotional to grasp. And I think a lot of people mistake that kind of detachment for intelligence. They see someone who can talk about atrocities without flinching and think, wow, this person really understands power. But understanding power and being callous about its consequences are two very different things, and too many people online confuse the two. The polling numbers thrown around deserve scrutiny too. The 82% figure about Israeli public opinion supporting the expulsion of all Palestinians from Gaza, I'd really want to see the original source on that because polling on wartime attitudes varies enormously depending on who's conducting the poll, exactly how the question is phrased, when during the conflict it was administered, and what the sample size looked like. Anyone who spent time looking at polling data knows you can get wildly different results by changing a single word in the question. Support removing versus support expelling versus support transferring will give you completely different numbers, even with the same population. Throwing out a stark figure like 82% without any of that context isn't informative, it's persuasive. There's a difference. Same goes for the 66% Amalek statistic. These might come from legitimate surveys, but stripped of methodology, they're just numbers designed to shock you into agreement. Now, the ISIS section. This is honestly where the whole thing collapses for me, and it collapses hard. A lot of people believe that ISIS is a creation of Mossad. Who? Which people specifically? What's the documentation? What's the evidence chain? Because a lot of people believe is the oldest trick in the book for smuggling in a claim you can't actually support. A lot of people believe the earth is flat, too. That doesn't make it worth discussing as though it's a serious geopolitical position. The underlying observation that ISIS never conducted a major attack inside Israel does have like 15 plausible explanations that don't require Mossad puppet mastering the entire organization. Israel has one of the most heavily fortified and surveilled borders on the planet. ISIS was primarily interested in establishing a territorial caliphate in regions where state authority had already collapsed, which is why they went into Syria and Iraq, where there were massive power vacuums. They went where it was easy and where they could actually hold ground. Israel is the opposite of that. Trying to attack Israel would have been suicidal, even by ISIS standards, and they knew it. There's nothing mysterious about a terrorist organization choosing soft targets over hard ones. That's literally what every insurgency in history has done.